parasites clinging to me forever should just go to a facility. When I returned home from the hospital where my mother-in-law was admitted, a large moving truck was waiting for me. I immediately asked Henry what was going on, and his response was unbelievable. The shock of Henry's words was like being hit in the head with a blunt object, and I was at a loss for words. It meant that he was abandoning me to start a new life. Despite my stunned state, the movers continued their work without pause. In no time, the house was empty. Left alone, I couldn't move for a while, stunned. I had supported Henry and cared for my mother-in-law despite all the complaints, and now this was how I was repaid. Before I knew it, anger had taken root within me. Just thinking of Henry's triumphant smile made my blood boil. I wouldn't let him get away with this. Determined, I noticed something that caught my eye. This is it. Then, I began to take action. My name is Debbie Holmes. I am currently 65 years old. I married Henry, who is 2 years younger than me, and we are about to celebrate our 40th anniversary. Our marriage was arranged. I had just started at a new company. A client who frequented the company insisted, and I couldn't refuse. At the matchmaking meeting, for some reason, my father-in-law took a great liking to me. My parents weren't against it either, and I ended up getting married as things progressed. Both my coworkers and my family celebrated our marriage, and it wasn't a bad life. Our first child, Ben, and then our daughter, Kristen, were born, and I felt happy. As a daughter-in-law living with the family, I was desperate with child-rearing, but now the children are independent. They have married and are living happily with their own families. Being a daughter-in-law had its challenges. Now that I am facing old age, I want to spend it more relaxed compared to the busy days of child-rearing. However, I can't just speak of ideals. My mother-in-law, now 88 years old, has been in and out of hospitals for about 10 years due to her age. I'm running around every day taking care of my mother-in-law and providing her with care. Henry is still an active office worker, even before retirement, but I have been doing everything alone, without asking him for help, as part of my duties as a daughter-in-law. When I was younger, I used to ask Henry for favors. For instance, even for a simple request like, "Please buy some milk." He would complain, "Why didn't you buy it? You want me, tired from work, to stop by the store?" In the past, many households were dominated by authoritative husbands, and my father-in-law had that kind of personality. However, Henry lacked kindness in addition to that. Originally, I married because my father-in-law liked me. If you ask whether there was love from Henry, there wasn't. Nonetheless, once married, I thought we had to cooperate and stick together, and I did my best to serve Henry. 15 years into our marriage, my father-in-law passed away. After that, my life changed drastically. Henry began to boast that he was the head of the household, and even my kind mother-in-law changed. "I didn't say anything because father liked you, but I was opposed to your marriage, Debbie. You're not pretty or smart. The only good thing about you is that you're built for easy childbirth." She started to mock my physique like that and began to say she had been opposed to the marriage. I should have persuaded father to stop the marriage. I couldn't go against what Dad said. But I'm a better father than he was. If you had been a better mother, Ben and Kristen could have gone to better schools. The two of them began to speak ill of me together. Indeed, our children were not particularly smart. Henry and I had no particular preference for private schools, so the kids just went to the local public school, and the topic of exams never even came up. However, they would use anything to mock me. Like now, they would talk about the children or ridicule my cooking, and sometimes even mock my parents. I always felt depressed by the constant sarcasm and insults, and it must undoubtedly have a negative effect on the children who hear it. I said to Henry, "If you have complaints about me, say them directly. It's unpleasant to hear you and your mother gossiping together, and don't you think about what the children will think when they hear this?" However, Henry mocked my appeal. It's your fault for being talked about, right? Besides, Ben and Kristen think the same as me and Mom. How could you say that? If you understand, then do the housework perfectly so you won't get talked about. Mom and I don't want to say these things. It's for your own good. Plus, it makes you angry because it's the truth, right? I wanted to tell Henry. Are you a perfect husband and father? But I held back my feelings. Thinking that such a rational argument might make Henry more than just angry, maybe even burst a blood vessel, I desperately tried to calm myself down. See, you can't say anything, can you? All you can do is try harder. Pleased with my silence, Henry said that. I had always been a housewife, oppressed by my mother-in-law and Henry, enduring for the sake of the children, and never leaving the house, living as a family in this home. That effort paid off, and both Ben and Kristen became independent successfully. Thankfully, they grew up honest and kind, unaffected by Henry or my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, who used to insult me, has aged and weakened physically, with repeated hospital admissions recently. There were physical difficulties with caregiving, but the insults had decreased significantly compared to before, and just not having that mental strain was a relief. I had years of anger from being insulted. Still, I couldn't abandon my weakened mother-in-law and somehow continued to care for her. Contrarily, Henry, despite it being his own mother, didn't try to handle anything himself and left it all to me. You're still okay to accompany Mom to the hospital tomorrow, right? Even when I confirmed a plan I had mentioned long before because I had another commitment, he responded angrily. What? Of course, it's impossible. Didn't I tell you? My aunt is hospitalized, and I'm going to visit her with my mom. I've already made the reservation. I don't care about that. Which is more important to you, your aunt or my mom? You know who should be the priority, right? In this day and age, you can't even visit the hospital without a reservation. I had looked forward to visiting my aunt after booking with the hospital and making plans with my mom, but being told that, I had nothing to say back. In the end, as always, he makes excuses or manipulates me like a slave, and he never accompanies his mom to the hospital. He doesn't handle hospital admissions or discharges, nor cares for personal hygiene, meals, or bathing assistance. Using work as an excuse, Henry leaves all caregiving to me, doing whatever he pleases. When it comes to Mom's hospital expenses, even when I tried to discuss, the conversation ended with his single response. Just pay from the account. But I didn't give up on dialogue. Now that the children were not a unifying force, giving up felt like it would be the end of us as a family. However, my efforts seemed to have the opposite effect. Perhaps because I spoke too insistently, Henry stopped coming home. I'm a department head, you know? I'm busy with work. Henry is nearing retirement age. His current position is department head. His being busy with work is probably not a lie, but it's clear he's avoiding coming home by being too late or having no weekends off. It's your fault Henry doesn't come to visit me. Even the verbally adept mother-in-law started blaming me for Henry's absence, venting her stress. As a person, as a wife, as a daughter-in-law, I had been trying desperately, but I was at my limit. Then, an incident finally snapped the tense thread. It happened one day when I went to pick up some clothes for my mother-in-law at the hospital. It's you again today. When is Henry coming? I keep telling him to visit you when he's back, but it seems he's been too busy with work lately and hardly comes home. Don't lie. You're telling Henry not to go to the hospital. While enduring her nagging as usual, I gathered her laundry and headed home. Then, I saw a moving truck stopped in front of the house. Wondering what was happening, I was shocked as I watched our belongings being moved out rapidly, and I rushed inside the house. What, you're back? Henry was supposed to be at work, yet there he was. As if keeping watch, he oversaw the moving crew efficiently transporting items out. What's going on? I shouted at Henry. Then, to my surprise, Henry laughed. "Can't you see? We're moving to a new house." He said it as if it were the most natural thing. A new house? And a move. I haven't heard anything about this, and I'm not prepared. There was no explanation. All I could do was panic in my confusion. Henry laughed at me mockingly again. "Who said I was taking you with me? I'm the only one moving." "What? Then what am I supposed to do?" "I don't care. A parasite who's always clinging to me should just go to a facility." Henry's words hit me like a blow to the head, leaving me speechless. It meant he was abandoning me to start a new life. Even as I stood there in shock, the movers continued their work. The house was empty in no time. "Well, take care then." With those triumphant words, Henry left me alone and walked out of the house. Overwhelmed by the shock, I was unable to move for a while. I had supported Henry and taken care of his mother. Could this really be happening to me? Anger was brewing inside me. Just thinking about Henry's triumphant smile infuriated me. I won't let him get away with this. That's when something caught my eye. This is it. Then, I began to take decisive action. After Henry left, I found a completed divorce form he had left behind in the now empty house. I filled it out and submitted it. Though Henry and I had become strangers, one day, a month later, I received a call on my smartphone. "What do you mean you haven't paid for Mom's hospital bills?" And someone called saying to pick up the laundry. What on earth are you doing? It was Henry. I could not hide my displeasure as I took the call. Furious, I shouted back at him over the phone. "Hospital bills? Why should I have to pay? And the laundry, why do I have to do that?" But Henry wasn't silent. "Didn't I tell you to pay the hospital bills from the account? Don't tell me you've been using my account money?" Henry shouted back, sounding enraged. Accused of something I hadn't done, I couldn't back down, and it escalated into an argument. "Which account are you talking about?" "The account for living expenses, of course. I've been giving it to you, haven't I? That account has been empty for ages. The last time you deposited money into the living expenses account was 3 years ago. Did you think the balance was infinite?" "What? That can't be." Seemingly startled by my voice, Henry faltered and fell silent. Indeed, since the beginning of our marriage, I had been assigned an account for living expenses. It was set up to receive automatic transfers from Henry's salary account each month. However, those transfers had stopped about 3 years ago. When I asked the bank, they said there were no funds in the salary deposit account to make the transfers. Since the salary was supposed to be transferred the day after payday, the only explanation for the lack of funds was that Henry was withdrawing everything on payday. I've asked you about it many times. But every time, you dismiss it annoyingly, claiming ignorance. You always blamed it on my misunderstanding or lack of checking, never taking responsibility yourself. I don't know. It must have been embezzled by the bank." Henry had the audacity to say something like that. Of course, that couldn't be true. It was just another attempt to shift the blame. How can you even say such a thing? That's impossible. I kept quiet because I thought it would be too troublesome if I nagged you too much and you got angry, but where has the money really gone? Tell me the truth. At my words, Henry fell silent. Then, as if defiant again, he said, "Anyway, I don't know. Just go pick up Mom's laundry." And then he hung up the phone. I was stunned. To start a fight and then hang up the phone when losing the argument, how childish can one be? Naturally, I felt no obligation or desire to take care of his mother anymore. I ignored Henry's words and put down my smartphone. But the next day, another call came. This time, it was from Kristen. "Hey. Dad told me to go pick up Grandma's laundry." I had already explained the situation to both Ben and Kristen. I had told them not to worry, thinking it would be too much trouble for them since they both have their own families. However, since I didn't comply with his demands, Henry had called Kristen, telling her to take care of his mother. How can he forget what he has done to Mom and then demand I take care of his mother? What a selfish man. Kristen was angry on my behalf. Just ignore it. He'll have to figure it out himself. But I think he also contacted Ben. He's asking him to pay for Grandma's hospital fees. What? Hearing Kristen's story, I felt a surge of anger at Henry's audacious actions. To think he would even beg money from his children. It made my blood boil. Thank you for telling me. Tell Ben he doesn't have to pay. I'll talk to your father. I relayed this to Kristen and then ended the call. Henry had told Kristen to go to the hospital at 2 p.m. today to pick up the laundry. He said he would be there too and asked Ben to bring the money for the hospital fees at that time. I decided to go to the hospital at 2 p.m. instead of the kids. When I entered the hospital room for the first time in a month, there was a mountain of laundry piled up. Finally, you're here. Hurry up and do the laundry. As soon as she saw my face, my mother-in-law spoke angrily. There are washing machines and dryers in the lobby, you know. I'm sick and hospitalized. Why should I have to do it myself when I have a capable daughter-in-law? It's a nuisance for the nurses too. From her words, it seemed she did not know that Henry and I were divorced. Apparently, some of the laundry had been done by sympathetic nurses because it was piling up. While she seemed to feel sorry for troubling others, she apparently had no such feelings towards me, now a stranger. As I opened my mouth to tell her about the divorce, the door to the hospital room opened. It was Henry. Seeing me, he made a displeased face and said, "Why are you here? Where are Kristen and Ben? They're not coming." I told them they don't have to. Why not? I told them to come and show their grandmother their faces. Seizing the moment, my mother-in-law also spoke up. You really are a disaster. I wanted to see them too. Facing the sarcastic remarks of my mother-in-law, I responded, I won't stop the kids if they genuinely want to visit on their own. But this man told Kristen to do the laundry and Ben to bring money for the hospital fees. Hospital fees? Even my mother-in-law seemed puzzled by that remark. Yes. I haven't received any living expenses for 3 years, and I've been paying for your mother's hospital bills out of my own money. I have no intention of paying anymore, so it seems that this month's payment hasn't been made. My mother-in-law turned pale upon hearing this. Henry, what does this mean? Where is your money? What about your father's inheritance? Why is Debbie paying? Well, that's... Henry was at a loss for words. I took the time to explain everything to my mother-in-law carefully. He doesn't have any money. And we are divorced now, so I have no obligation to care for your mother or pay for her hospital fees anymore. You two will have to discuss what to do next. As I spoke, my mother-in-law's face grew paler, and she suddenly burst into tears. If she were crying over her son's pitiful state, there might be some hope, but it seems that was not the case. You fool! Why would you let go of Debbie? Who will take care of me now? My mother-in-law lamented the loss of her caretaker and her financial security. No money? What am I supposed to do now? I'll get kicked out of the hospital and my illness won't be cured. Mom, calm down. Henry was flustered. Seeing his state, I couldn't help but smile. Even if you were kicked out, you wouldn't have a home to return to, right? Henry looked alarmed at those words. It seems he hadn't told his mother about moving out. What do you mean? Henry. My mother-in-law became even more agitated and grabbed Henry. Once you calm down, I'll explain everything. Just rest for now. The two were grasping each other's arms. Henry tried to calm her down, but my mother-in-law was inconsolable. Watching this, I smiled and said, Well, I'll be going home now. Wait. Where are you living? You're not at the house anymore. Oh, are you concerned? Since you told me to go to a facility, I moved into that high-end facility your mother always dreamed about. They do the laundry and I can choose various meals. It was handy that your mother had requested the brochure. Henry and my mother-in-law stopped their scuffle and looked at me. Yes, after Henry moved out, I relocated to a high-end senior living facility in the next town. Even though it's called a facility, it's like a hotel and very popular. It has a pool and a gym for health maintenance, and most importantly, I've made many friends of my age. My mother-in-law always said, "I want to live in a place like this too," as she liked looking at the brochure. When I saw the brochure in the emptied house, I decided to move there. The facility is popular, but when I mentioned my husband had suddenly moved out and I didn't want to bother my children, they promptly showed me a room as someone was just about to move out. Thanks to that, I'm living a dream life. You, to that facility? And I'm stuck in this hospital? My mother-in-law seemed regretful, bit her lip, and began to cry miserably. Saying such things about the hospital was utterly rude. I had been paying out of my pocket all this time for her treatments, and though she owed me gratitude, she had no reason to resent me. I'm going back to that facility. Take care, both of you. With that, I left the hospital room. As I walked down the corridor, I could hear my mother-in-law crying out in frustration, and I couldn't help but laugh. A week later, I was called by the staff of the facility to meet a visitor. Assuming it was either Ben or Kristen, I headed to the visitor's room, only to find Henry there. He glared at me with resentment, but not wanting to be like him, I spoke with a smile. "Oh, what brings you here? You took the money for this place from my account, didn't you?" He accused me right away, which really surprised me. "That's slanderous. There's no way that's true. Then why do you have so much money? There's no way you could pay for my mother's hospital bills." To think he would say that after I paid. I took a deep breath and said, "It really sounds bad. I just used the money I inherited from my parents." "Your poor parents left you a fortune?" "I've never heard such a thing. I invested it." After taking a sip of the coffee provided by the staff, I continued. "Invested?" "Yes. The amount I put in cryptocurrencies increased tenfold. The amount I put in stocks increased fivefold. That can't be. While you were busy spending money on other women, I became wealthy." Henry stopped in his tracks at my words. He looked up slowly with a pale face. "I did." "Women. Oh, you thought I didn't know? I know about the money you've spent on women and that you moved to a new house to live with one." Henry turned even paler rapidly. Watching him shrink was almost comical. "Oh, by the way, I also know that woman is getting married soon." "What?" "Yes, she has a boyfriend who's a model, right? You were a great source of money for her." "What are you talking about?" In this bizarre moment of me laughing alone, Henry turned pale and then, startled, quickly grabbed his phone. He started making a panicked phone call. "Hello?" The voice that answered the phone was probably the woman I mentioned. Her voice sounded quite young. "Mia. I'm so relieved. I heard something troubling and got worried. I'll be home soon. It appears the woman he was having an affair with is named Mia." Henry desperately calling her name looked rather pitiful from the sidelines. After saying that to the person on the other end, Henry's voice became anxious as he waited for a response. "Just come home today, please. I'm begging you." "Mia? Mia." After saying that, he froze for a while, then repeatedly tried to call back, but it seemed like she wasn't answering. Eventually, he gave up and his arms drooped. "That's what you get for messing with young girls without knowing your place." I couldn't help but laugh. Henry glared at me and said, "How do you know about Mia?" I wasn't obliged to answer his question, but I was free, so I slowly opened my mouth. Henry hadn't been coming home, and since the household money had stopped coming in, I wanted to know where the money was going, so I hired a detective. Originally, Henry would occasionally gamble. I thought he might be spending money on that, but what the detective told me was a different story: infidelity. It seems he was deeply involved with a much younger woman. It wasn't Henry withdrawing money on payday, it was her. Henry, unaware that the money was being taken, continued to transfer living expenses and believed he was paying for his mother's hospital bills. The woman first transferred Henry's salary to her account, then gave him an allowance from it. It seems she was using the rest to pay for living expenses. I just found out everything recently myself. Now I finally understand why you suddenly moved and where all the money went. Well, I can't say I'm satisfied. Did you buy the new house with your father's inheritance? The detective and I were appalled by how you spent the money. We were already shocked by the move, but what will your mother think if she finds out you used your father's money? Henry remained silent and said nothing. He had handed over control of all his finances, except for the household account, to that woman and ended up being completely exploited. Well, at least thanks to the living expenses you provided, that girl was able to save enough for her wedding. Good job. Henry's complexion worsened rapidly, and he looked like he was about to vomit. He probably never imagined that he was being deceived. What a naive man. I would be lying if I said I harbored no ill feelings towards that woman, but now, I can only see Henry as foolish for being deceived. I couldn't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude. When I confronted the woman with the facts I had learned, she readily admitted everything, and Henry ended up being kicked out of his house. He said I would live longer, so the house should be in my name, right? He had been tricked into putting the house under her name, and thus he lost it. Strictly speaking, I suppose the woman couldn't just walk away without any consequences, such as taxes and whatnot, but that's none of my business. I'm sure she'll get her comeuppance eventually. Having lost his money and house, and even the woman, Henry eventually came crawling back to me. I was foolish. You took care of everything, even my mother, and I was just foolish. Henry came back to me, crying and kneeling, begging for forgiveness. Yes, that's right. You are really foolish. Have you finally realized how foolish you've been? I looked down at him with a smile. Of course. I was out of my mind. Let's go back together. Let's live in that house again. If you don't like that idea, let me stay here with you. Seeing my smile, Henry must have thought he was forgiven and began to make a shamelessly bold request. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him, fulfilling his wishes, or changing my lifestyle. Don't joke too much. It costs $1 million to get in here. Why should I pay such a huge amount of money for you? But we've been together before. Yes. We were together, and all I ever received were insults and injuries. But here, no one hurts me, and everyone is kind. The staff, as I told you before, even do my laundry. If I went back home, would you do all the cleaning, laundry, and cooking? And take care of your mother too? I said all this with a smile that never wavered, and Henry was at a loss for words. What he really wanted was not for me to come back, but to have a servant. You should be thankful that I'm not demanding compensation from you. But if you persist, I'm willing to sue to get it. It seemed that Henry finally understood my feelings wouldn't change, and he trudged back home. All the furniture and appliances had been taken by that woman, so replacing them would cost money, but as a man living alone, he would have to properly equip his house if he wanted to survive. Concerned that the children might be burdened, I contacted them, but contrary to my worries, Ben and Kristen seemed to have little regard for a father who had never done anything for them. Huh. Well, he can just figure out how to live on his own, right? Maybe I'll check if he's still alive once in a while. They said. If he asks for money, absolutely do not give it to him. I firmly warned the two of them. As adults, I can't interfere with how Ben and Kristen interact with Henry. A parent should not want to burden or worry their children. Someone who uses their children is not a parent, and I made sure to convey just that. 5 years later, my mother-in-law passed away a year ago. She was forced out of the hospital because she couldn't pay her medical bills. "Are you abandoning me?" She cried out in the hospital, but if there's no money, even unwillingly, the hospital can't do anything but abandon her. Apparently, she managed with outpatient treatment. However, when she returned home and found nothing left, she must have realized she could no longer rely on Henry. She canceled her life insurance, got a small amount of money, and moved into a facility right away. The drafty, old facility she moved into was nothing like the luxurious one she had dreamed of staying in. If only she had been a kinder mother-in-law, I might have been able to fulfill her dream of living in a high-end facility, but unfortunately, she was not that kind of mother-in-law. Henry lives alone in that house. After retiring, he speaks to no one and has become a recluse. Occasionally, he calls me, begging me to come back, but not even if the world turned upside down would I consider it. Betrayed by the woman and unreturned by me, he often weeps that he can no longer trust anyone. After all, it was he who betrayed me first, yet he acts like a victim. I have someone nice now. I don't want to waste my life anymore, doing favors for you. He seemed deeply shocked by my words, but since he was the one who drove me away, he has no right to be hurt. If he still misunderstands that I belong to him after we've split, then that's just a nuisance. His actions have shaped his future. Although he still plays the victim, he needs to deeply reflect and realize that his current life is the result of his own actions. I continue to live in the facility, surrounded by friends I've made here, staying active in the pool and enjoying daily walks. I'm happy and content every day. As I told Henry, I've met someone wonderful. It's a bit embarrassing at this age to start a new life, but he wants to spend the rest of his life with me, and the children are supportive. I don't consider my life unhappy, but having another chance to love and be loved as a woman is also something wonderful I embrace.